Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers. I'm your host, Harriette Cole, and I have an amazing guest with me today, someone who I feel like I met her in the very earliest of days when I moved to New York City. I think that it was when I was working on a book called Songs of My People, but we're going to check. When you've been in someone's orbit for so long and you see all the great work, you don't always know. But let me tell you who she is. She is Deborah Willis, a groundbreaking photographer, historian, curator, and educator whose work is rooted in preserving and uplifting African-American photography, Black history, and Black visual culture. She has pursued a dual professional career as one of the nation's leading historians and art photographers, as well as an educator, serving as the chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Deborah's work and scholarship have earned her numerous accolades and honors, including the Infinity Award for Writing from the International Center for Photography, the MacArthur Genius Fellowship, the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women's Caucus for Art, as well as multiple honorary doctoral degrees. In the span of her career, she has produced and contributed to more than 20 books, her most recent being the 25th anniversary edition of Reflections in Black, a history of Black photographers 1840 to the present that was just released. I've only scratched the surface. There's so much about Deb Willis that is amazing and inspiring. So let's get to talk to her right now. Hello, my dear.
Hi, so good to see you and hear the introduction.
Yeah, so Deb, was it Songs of My People?
It was Songs of My People, yes.
And I met my husband working on that book.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was that, by the way. So for the people who don't know, Songs of My People is a photo documentary in the life of Black America that came out just around the time when those day in the life books, like the Day in the Life of Australia was one of the big ones. And my high school dear friend, Eric Easter, was one of the editors on that book. And I was the editorial coordinator while there were 50 photographers who went across the country documenting our culture. You have been documenting our culture since you opened your eyes. So what made that be a driving force for you? Because it really has been the lens through which you see the world.
Yeah, I did not realize it was a driving force until I look back, and it seems that I'm constantly telling the story. Mm-hmm. But I grew up in photography culture, basically in Philadelphia. My father was an amateur photographer. My father's cousin had a studio, and in the neighborhood, a studio practice in the neighborhood. But also, Jack Franklin was our neighbor who learned photography in World War II, and he was the Black photojournalist in the area. So he published his photographs in the Philadelphia Tribune, as well as in the local newspaper called The Scoop. So my dad we're from a large family, both sides. My mother had 13 brothers and sisters. Wow. My dad had 9 brothers and sisters. So we, at one point I had 50 first cousins, and when I was young, right? So we were constantly taking photographs, constantly posing. And so my dad would often take photographs of us and have them developed in the local 5 and dime or drugstore. And I started placing the photographs in the photo album. Mm. And so I wanted to continue telling the stories of the good times that we had as children. And so that's, I think, where it started. And he also gave me a brownie, and I made photographs with the brownie and of my toys and things like that. So that's basically the grounding force. And I knew when I wanted to go to art school, I wanted to study photography. I had a desire to study photography, and did so after some years later, after high school.
Mm-hmm. And so how old do you think you were when that bug happened with all the cousins and taking pictures?
Mm-hmm. Well, My bug, I believe, started at 7. And
Wow.
that was my opportunity because when we were kids, we had to visit the library every week and take a book home and make a decision about a book that we're going to read for the week. I still recall walking in the library on Lehigh Avenue, and it was the Sweet Flypaper of Life was on the shelf in our local library. And I could see the photograph. I thought this is a book I wanted to take home. I couldn't read the words. I could
Mhm.
see, some of the words, but I wanted to take that book home. And I did, and kept it longer than expected. But I was fascinated with it because the lighting that Roy DeCarava shared in making that book was just a fascinating experience for me because I felt the same lighting in my own home.
Mm, that's
So that
beautiful.
was right.
And
So
and photography is nothing without lighting. I mean,
right.
the art of using light
Mm,
is something that is really fascinating to look at. So this book, this beautiful book that I am holding in
mhm,
my hand right now,
mm,
Reflections in Black, A History of Black Photographers, 1840 to the Present. So what's amazing is in reading about your book, Deb, it took you 25 years to actually make this book. And now this is 25 years later that you have updated the book. So this is like a lifelong commitment.
mhm.
It's that it started 50 years ago. Like, how did it start? How did you get the idea to make this book that is it's a history book is what it is.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah, it is a sense of history because when I was studying photography, when I studied photography at the Philadelphia College of Art, there were no Black photographers in our history books. I had a great professor, Ann Tucker, and I had other not so great professors, but Ann Tucker was the person who I said to her, well, we're the Black photographers, because I knew Jack Franklin and I knew Juanita Sleet and Gordon Parks because I grew up in a beauty shop where magazines, like Ebony Jet, Sepia, Life and Look, and National Geographic were part of my life, and I used to
Right.
always look at photographs, listening to my mom and the ladies in the shop chat. And so I said, I know that there are Black photographers, and at the time it was the '70s, and the Black Photographers Annual was circulating then. Joe Crawford had published the annual, and there were a number of photographers. So I looked, and they were not in our history books. And Vanderzee, I had a chance to see the Harlem of My Mind exhibition in
Mhm.
1969, and that was not in Vanderzee wasn't in the book. So I was just curious. So I proposed that I not take a class, but have an independent study project where I could just do a research paper, a semester long research paper on Black photographers. And that's where I started looking at Black newspapers. The Black press was central for me in terms of looking for Black photographers. Then I started looking in the 19th century because I knew that they existed then. And I really believed then, I didn't know, but I believed that that Black people were involved with photography, not as just subjects, but as makers. And so that's where it started, as, this young photographer hoping to be making images. I ended up looking for others to extend the story about the experience.
And back at that point in the 70s, I think that our newspapers around the country were very important.
Mhm.
The small Black newspapers in cities north, south, throughout the United States were telling our stories. They were telling them visually as well as, whatever those precious stories that celebrated us,
Mhm.
where the mainstream newspapers often were maligning us. And so to find those people, I think especially them was really important. it's interesting because today a lot of those papers don't exist.
Yeah, it's sad because many of the photographers that I met in the 70s and 80s, the Black press was central to them. And the stories that they told about our communities was not only a tragic story, it was a lived experience of play, occupational achievements, and also just community gatherings such as parades and debutantes and all kinds of moments of church experiences. So they were published in the newspapers and the magazines at that time. And many of the photographers learned in the 19 when my dad was young, they learned through photography and learned photography in the war, in World War II. But the 19th century, many of the photographers were apprentice or abolitionists, such as J.P. Ball, the Goodrich brothers, and J.P. Ball in Cincinnati, Goodrich brothers in Pennsylvania. And Augustus Washington, who was in New Haven and Hartford, as well as New Jersey, but they were abolitionists documenting moments of strife and life, who were free Blacks at that time. And so there were different pockets. And then I also looked for women who were assistants to their husbands or to white photographers so that's where I really wanted to incorporate women photographers as well.
And this history that you're sharing, which I think most people don't know about, these names that you're sharing, did you begin to learn about them when you were at the Schomburg?
No, it's amazing. It was really, I visited, I was in the libraries I was going to Philadelphia Public Library, but also Temple University had a really great library at that time, and also the Library Company of Philadelphia. So I would actually go to the city directories and try to look for names of photographers, all of the city directories, when they were Black, they had an asterisk next to it. So we knew that they were Black or colored at that time, or Negro at that time.
Asterisk by their names because they were Black?
Because they were segregated at that time. And so
that ended up being a benefit for you.
For me, I loved it, because then I went to the Schomburg and looked for names of photographers like C.M. Batty, who developed the photography department at Tuskegee Institute. So it's just amazing, because A'Lelia Bundle's book, Joy Goddess, she also had a number of photographs were made by Black photographers like R.E. Mercer and Eddie Elcha. And I knew mainly because of the city directories and the fact that they were Black photographers. And I was able to identify, when I visited the Schomburg in 1974 and 75, trying to identify. But most of the images at the Schomburg were I guess, what are they? Cataloged by subjects, not by photographers. So I had to look on the back of the photograph. And so it was back and forth. And I had, Ernest Kaiser was a librarian there who just was really helpful. And Mrs. Hudson, Jean Blackwell Hudson and Ruth Ann Stewart, they were really helpful in terms of helping me identify some of the photographs at that time.
It's fascinating that this fire got lit in you and it never went out. That amount of research I'm sure it must have been really fascinating too, to be able to touch those photographs and turn them over to see it. And it kind of defies what we hear so often, that, well, there aren't any Black, whatever it is, whatever the category is. Oh, I couldn't find a Black one. And you're like, that's not going to happen here. Let me remind folks, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are here talking with Deborah Willis, who has the 25th anniversary edition of this beautiful book, Reflections in Black, the history of Black photographers, 1850 to the present.
Right. What I love about the title of this program is Dream Leapers. That's part of what I believed. I believed in my dream.
Mm-hmm. And you are manifesting it in all of these years later. So now, the 25th anniversary of this book, why is it important today, Deb, that this book would be refreshed and come out now based upon everything that's happening in our culture?
Just the idea of, that our history is the attempt to erase our history.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important to just remind others, people who are studying photography, but people who don't know about the community, that we exist. We existed. We contributed to this country in many ways. So that's why it was really important for me to work with the publisher and work with others to create this book, because a number of the photographers are deceased who were part of the project, and they were joyful when I reached out to them in the 70s and 80s to say that, wow, I threw out my photographs, like Morgan and Marvin Smith. They had a studio above the Apollo Theater, and they said no one was interested in their photographs. So they threw their photographs out the back window, but then they kept a number of the images that they felt were significant. So I heard those stories, and I heard families, didn't know what to do with their fathers or uncles' negatives, and so that they just put them on the sidewalk. And so those are like heartbreaking stories. But then there was Gordon Parks, who understood the importance of his photography, and he saved all of his photographs. And over time, he became a mentor to me, and we shared many moments of the aspect of photography, and just created the Gordon Parks Foundation. And so that was significant for me at that time, and over a period of time. And so I'm involved with the Gordon Parks Foundation because of Gordon's fantastic collection. And I also co-curated a number of exhibitions on Gordon.
I mean, he was a true Renaissance man in every way. He's such an inspiration because he pursued all of his talents, and he had a lot of them. Not everybody is blessed with lots of talents, but he certainly did. He was generous in sharing his gifts. So you've met so many interesting people. He certainly is one of them. Give us some highlights for other great beings that you have had the opportunity to work with.
Well, just Monita Sleet is one that is another ebony photographer, and he was helpful. In 1 second, just
no problem.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so Monita Sleet was the ebony photographer who also mentored me at a time when it was significant to think about photojournalism, but also the fact that he was documenting many of the Black celebrities, but also the activists of that time period. I had also an opportunity to work with Jeannie Matusameh Ash. She was organizing an exhibition and a book on Black women photographers.
Right.
And having a chance to work with her and meet her and her husband, Arthur Ashe, over that time period. So when I think about all of the people, like the Skurlock Studios, George and Robert Skurlock in Washington, D.C., they were the key photographers in Washington, D.C. And Robert McNeil is another. And so Robert McNeil was in New York in the 1930s and 40s, and he documented a project called the Bronx Slave Market, where he noticed the workings of women who were looking for work in day work, and that they would stand on the corner in the Bronx, Grand Concourse or other areas, and then would have the women, white women from Westchester, hire them to work. So that these were projects that they created over a time period, that individual photographers were just focusing on main stories that mainly focused on the community, that was about uplift, about work, about activism. Kwame Brathwaite, I am just so excited to see that the work that his work is actually now published in many and exhibitions in many places, but now it is circulating. And I just think that his Grandessa models were so ideal for me to see Black women with their natural hair and wearing African style clothing. And so there were moments of that. All of these photographers were so central, and some of the people that I met over a time period.
Speaking of Kwame Brathwaite, I was so pleased that he knew that his work was being celebrated. A lot of times people go to their grave and they don't have a sense of the impact that they have on others.
Yes,
but he lived long enough to be celebrated in that way, which was powerful.
Now, I think it's really important at fashion when I published my first project, and I wanted Kwame to be a part of it, because I met Kwame in 1969 when I first moved to New York, and he was very helpful guiding me into this new photography world. And I told him I was doing a project, and he wanted me to only show the photograph of the activism in the diasporic activism, and not the photographs of the beauty and the fashion. And I was like, but I really want to use these photographs. He said, no, I really want Thomas Sankara. I want people to know who he is and who he was, and the significance of the life of Black activism in Africa. So it's amazing that the photographers I met over a time period, they had a desire to tell the stories that they wanted to see published. And so I had to, work with them in that way. It's the same with Lou Draper, who was also a mentor to me, and now seeing his work.
Tell us who he is.
So Lou Draper is one of the founders of the Kamonge Workshop with Tony Barboza and Roy DeCarava. And he taught photography in Mercer County and community college in New Jersey. But he documented all of Harlem over a time period, and the workers, but also New York City. And so he was a central documentarian and photojournalist at that time.
And the Kamonge Workshop was so important because it created fellowship for Black photographers, right? Can you tell us? People may not know about that. Can you describe it?
Yeah, so the Kamonge Workshop, I think it started in 1963, and the photographers worked closely together, creating a dialogue for other Black photographers to share their work, to exhibit their work, but also to document their communities. Harlem and Brooklyn, the Bronx, and sometimes in some areas of New Jersey. But it was significant for them because they were unhappy with the images that some of the white photographers were publishing about Black people in Harlem, and so they wanted to have a counter narrative at that time, and they worked together in creating different portfolios. They also gave awards to Black photographers, such as James Van Der Zee and Gordon Parks and P.H. Polk, who was a photographer at Tuskegee Institute. P.H. Polk studied with C.M. Batty, who also George Eastman gave money to. I'm sorry, just my mind is like all over the place going from the 19th, 20th century. But he gave money to Tuskegee to develop a photography department. And so I think it's really important that they understood how important it was in the 19th century to teach young Black people photography. And when I think about W.B. Du Bois and the Crisis magazine, that they hired Black photographers to document the parades and the communities and the portraits of young babies. And they had baby contests, they had beauty contests. And the beauty contests were were made me focus on the subscription. So people would buy so they can see their families in magazines. And so the circulation of these images were not only in the families, but they were circulating in the community, the wider communities.
Mm-hmm. You know what? When you say that about the beauty contest, what popped in my head was Jet Magazine and the Beauty of the Week. Which, by the way, when I was at JPC some years ago, and we were looking to, reinvigorate the brand, at one point, folks said, "Well, we don't want that Beauty of the Week anymore. That's sexist," and it was removed for about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Because people were in an uproar. How dare you? Can't do that. These are our women. These are, to your point of, there were people who wanted to have the politics, but having the whole story, of all the complexity of who we are, I think is something that we got through our publications.
Yeah, because the Beauty of the Week, you had a chance to see the desires of some of the young women who wanted to be judges and lawyers and secretaries and models and actresses. So they actually described, yes, they did their digits, in terms of their style, but they also talked about their desire to work, not in domestic, not to do day labor, but they wanted to move into another realm and have opportunities. And that's where the Beauty of the Week was a significant part of this history. And Johnson Publishing was a part of that.
Celebration. It was a celebration of another aspect of who we are, which, but always from the perspective of celebration.
Yes.
So there's something now in language that is commonly said, at least I'll say among conscious people, that people of color, people of African descent, are the global majority. That this idea that I think goes back for many generations, but we kind of forgot, because in this country we've been called minority so much, that the notion, I think it's like a Marcus Garvey kind of thought, this Pan-African sensibility makes us a majority. And I'm thinking about your work, because you have done work from a global perspective for a long time, and you host different activities around the world and really keep the conversations going globally. When did that begin, and what are some of the highlights that you would say of the global work that you've done?
It's really exciting that I work with my colleagues here at NYU, Mancha Diawara and Awam Ampa, and looking for ways to tell the global story about Black people. We created a conference called Black Portraitures in 2013, and we opened in Paris, France, at the Quai Branly and the Beaux-Arts, to have conversations, to not look at just one aspect of Black life, but also to think about in America, but we wanted to also look at cities in West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, and the Caribbean. And so we wanted writers and artists to look at the concept of portrait, not just as a 8x10 image, but a portrait of a community, and how do we tell our stories. So when we began it, we looked at sports as a subject, and so we thought about how a lot of the soccer players were internationally known and not known in the U.S. So we wanted to invite a key soccer player to talk about it in Paris. So we moved from Paris to Florence, and each time we traveled, we had over 500 people who paid their own way, because we did not have the support of big organizations or foundations, because it was the people believed in the story. They believed in it. So we also had it in South Africa, Johannesburg. We also had it here in NYU, at Harvard, in Cambridge, in Baltimore. But the key story for us was that there were young scholars and older scholars who were presenting papers. And some of the presentations allowed people to have their tenure reviews, that they were able to publish books about their subjects and some of the projects that they worked on. And so and sometimes we had pushback in the cities that we visited, because when we first we were in France, the Black people in France said, well, how can you get a space here? We can't. We live here. We're from here. And you Americans, you come here and you take over our space. And so we allowed that kind of conversation. We didn't stop it because they were angry that they were ignored in their country. And we as Americans from the diaspora moving into a space that they could not or did not have access to. And once that we had the same experience in Johannesburg. We were, like yelled at, attacked. But once that was over, everybody was like family. They were over that. Yeah, we had to listen. They listened. We said this. We wanted this to happen. The security came, and the security were Black, and they were happy to see us there. But it was we talked about disparities. We talked about the child mortality, women, fashion. And so there were so many talking about migrations, Black death in the sea. So there were so many stories that needed to be heard. And then there were also difficult stories that people wanted to share. And felt that, okay, now we got this over with. Now we're going to move over. We had like 3 days, but the first few hours were difficult.
Intense.
Right. But I had I didn't expect, I was naive. I did not think that we were going to have that problem each time. But then once we exhaled and had the open conversation, we were able to see, okay, I understand,
Wow.
because we've been blocked out of places.
Oh, absolutely. Let me just remind folks, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking with Deborah Willis, who has the 25th anniversary edition, hot off the press, Reflections in Black, a history of Black photographers, 1840 to the present. I love that you said you started that in 2013. Will it continue? Because
yes, this year we met in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was an amazing experience. We had an opportunity to meet some of the people, family survivors who were there, and then scholars who talked about the life in Tulsa, and then some of the native Osage people were part of the conversation. So we had that conversation in Tulsa. So NYU has a campus in Tulsa. And so we had that opportunity to bring people together. And next year is going to be at the Getty. And the theme is called the Black Built Environment. And so we're looking at architecture, but also communities and art communities and artist communities that were created over a time period. And then we're going to look at Brazil. And so when we think about the Black built environment, it's everywhere, and the concept is broad. So that's going to be in September and 26. Yeah.
Being at NYU, you're surrounded by students all the time. What would you say is most inspiring working with young people today, given everything that's going on in our world?
They are questioning. They're just so curious. They're trying to finding their voice, and then they doubt themselves. And I'm pushing them beyond that doubt. I won't allow them to breathe the doubt for a second. Like, okay, you can have this moment, but tell me why. Why are you not believing in this beautiful work that you're creating, or the ideas that you're writing about? So I also teach a course called The Black Body and the Lens, and it's a graduate course. So I meet a number of people who are from other countries. And so I'm curious about what what the experience is that they're writing about and they're considering of what it means to create a community through art, but also through science. And now we're struggling with the concept of AI. And so, so the students are constantly curious about their representation in the global sense, and the desire to tell their own stories. When we think about the history of Black people who migrated voluntarily from the Caribbean and moving to London, Toronto, to New York, or other parts of the US, that their stories are told. They're struggling with, how am I African American when I'm African Caribbean? And how do we fight these stories and think about that? So they're using new narratives and language to try to talk about identity in a sense. We have students who are writing about trans culture. So we're, dealing with a lot of major stories that are in discussion now about their communities and their bodies, and especially when with Black death publicly, when we had experienced COVID, and unfortunately death of young people through police brutality.
That time was such a pivotal time for so many. We had the pandemic, which had everybody at home. I think George Floyd's murder, because it was on repeat and everybody saw it so much, it certainly did have an impact. There was a lot of money that flooded into our communities, and now it is gone. And we have this backlash of anti-DEI. What is the approach that you take with your students when we see this? There's a real negative wave toward anything of color, anything different, anything that's not a white man.
Well, my students are, from all walks of life. They're young, they're white, they're blonde, they're Black, they have natural hair, they're short and tall, they're straight and gay. They're in New York because they want to be in New York, and they understand the diversity of the city of New York. They have a desire to explore ideas that share and that are different. And so the students who take my class, that's my experience, and it's joy. I love the struggles that we redefine. And I also enjoy the fact when we're disagreeing so that we can find a language to agree, where we're having opportunities. Like, I believe that New York is a campus and a canvas, that I make sure that they go to the MoMA to see the new photography exhibition. Each time the new photography exhibition is at MoMA in the fall, there are people from all over the world that are showing work. And I'm excited about the Studio Museum reopening because, again, we begin to see the work of artists from different parts of the world in the Studio Museum. So when I teach, they go to the Brooklyn Museum to see an exhibition. They also go to the Bronx. So we are moving throughout the city and to galleries in Chelsea. So there's that the multiplicity that we experience in studying photography and imaging. It's about walking the streets of New York and making images. And that, some people disagree that they don't want to go above 14th Street, and don't want to go beyond Canal Street. But once they leave, they're writing papers. I have them write response papers to the exhibitions that we create. It's on campus, but also when they travel to other exhibitions and to reflect on. There's an exhibition now that my work is in a show at the Museum of Art and Design, and it's a show called Motherhood, a reimagining about motherhood. And to see the curator finding ways to talk about motherhood and to see my work in there and have that experience is just wonderful. Redesigning Motherhood is the actual title.
Redesigning
Mhm.
Motherhood. I know that you have to go. Let me ask you one last question. You think about folks out here who are looking to manifest their dreams. What advice can you give them right now as we're moving into the end of this year and into next?
And one aspect I really believe is to believe.
Mm.
you know, that there are other people going to stop you from your dream, and I just believe that it's your dream. No one else can take it away from you. So that's what I tell my students often, that to believe in the work that you're doing. It's going to be difficult because the door is not always going to be open. And my son teases me because he says, when he said, "Mom, I'm not going to be an artist because all your friends are broke, and I want to live a lifestyle not of struggle. I want to live a different kind of lifestyle." And of course, I said, "But
He's an
hey,
artist.
they're all happy. They all believe in the work that they're doing." And so yeah, my son is Hank Willis Thomas, and he said, when I quote, as he says, I forced him to go to art school. He said, the third week, I'll never forget, and I tell parents that too. The third week, he called me up and said, "Thank you.
Mm.
This was the best experience in my life." Third week of school. And when I say that, I could see he went to Duke Ellington High School in DC, but he actually had a chance to breathe and believe in my dream, as he tells me, but also to believe in his own dream and his own vision. And that's something that I really encourage students to believe in their dreams.
Yeah, but believe is everything. Thank you,
Mhm.
Deb Willis.
Thank you
This
so
is a
much.
beautiful
Mhm.
book with so much wonderful information in it. Thank you for devoting your life to this work. We appreciate you so much.
And thank you for your work
Thank
and
you.
helping us believe in our dreams.
Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in. We've been talking with Deborah Willis, the author, creator of Reflections in Black, A History of Black Photographers, 1840 to the present. This book is filled with so many stories, so many beautiful images that really document all that we are and all that our creators have been for so many years. It's a must see and read. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.